This perimeter is not open to the public. Sir, step back. This area is restricted. I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately. Michael stopped in front of a captain and two senior airmen who were blocking the path to Hangar 19. His eyes remained fixed on the Rockwell B-1 Lancer aircraft ahead. No one else on that base had noticed what he had seen was wrong with that plane, and that mistake could be costly. That aircraft couldn't be allowed to take off. Michael Reed's workshop sat behind an old decommissioned gas station and still carried traces of its past. The former canopy that once covered the fuel pumps had been preserved and now sheltered cars under maintenance, protecting them from sun and rain. The main building, once a convenience store and office, had been repurposed. The old shelves now held auto parts, oils, and tools, while the counter where customers used to pay for fuel had become the customer service desk. Despite the transformation, some stains on the floor and the angular architecture of the facade still hinted at the place's history. Out on the concrete lot, once busy with cars refueling in a hurry, mechanics now moved about, pushing tool carts and swapping tires. Those who saw Michael fixing cars today had no idea he'd spent 4 decades serving as a chief mechanic in the U.S. Air Force. Life had taken many turns, and at 65, he was no longer part of the Air Force. But the Air Force was still a part of him. Michael had never fully disconnected from that world. Every morning, while organizing his tools at the shop, he kept the radio tuned to a local station that occasionally aired military news. At night, he'd browse online aviation forums, keeping up with rumors about fleet updates and base test flights across the country. His shop was about a 20-minute drive from the east gate of Tinker Air Force Base. And ever since talk began about upgrades to the Rockwell B-1 Lancer fleet, he had felt a growing urge to go back, just to catch a glimpse of those aircraft he had helped design and build so many years ago. One morning, he gave in to that urge. He drove to the base's secondary entrance where credentialed civilian observers were sometimes allowed. He parked outside the gate, grabbed his old notebook, the one he always carried, and walked to the closest spot where the planes could be seen. The sun was high, and the heat made the concrete shimmer like a dull mirror. From where he stood, Michael spotted a B-1B model parked near the hangar, with scaffolding covering one side of its fuselage. Technicians walked around with tablets, support trucks rumbled in the distance, and the air wavered with heat. He leaned against the fence and watched. For a moment, everything looked normal. But as the aircraft began to be slowly towed toward the runway, his eyes narrowed. Something felt wrong. Decades of experience told him this wasn't right. Michael positioned himself just ahead of the leading edge of the wings, at the exact spot where the trailing edges of both wings should align. That's when he saw it. The left wing was slightly more retracted than the right. It was a nearly invisible detail, one only trained eyes would notice, but it could mean the difference between a safe flight and a disaster. Michael knew this flaw. He'd seen it 3 times in his career. The hydraulic actuator for the variable geometry wing system might be stuck, creating an asymmetry in wing positioning that only becomes apparent at higher speeds, and that could be fatal in the air. He had to warn someone, not out of pride, not to prove himself, but because that plane was carrying pilots, and pilots shouldn't face danger because of a mistake he could help prevent. He walked toward the entrance of the hangar. He didn't want to trespass. He just wanted to show what he had seen, and the notes he had carefully written down in his notebook. That's when 2 senior airmen stopped him with a firm gesture. "Sir, this perimeter is not open to the public. I need to speak with someone responsible for the maintenance of the B-1B scheduled to take off today," Michael said, pointing to the aircraft on the runway. The 2 airmen glanced at each other, unmoving. "Do you have clearance, sir?" one of them asked. "No, but if you can give me just 2 minutes with someone from the crew, I can show you there's something wrong. I'm not here to cause trouble." "Then I need you to leave, now." "But I worked on this aircraft model for decades. I know it inside and out. There's a structural issue. That plane can't take off." The 2 airmen hesitated. Neither had the authority to allow access or initiate any off-script procedures. One of them reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder. "Hangar 19, this is Outer Post 3. We've got a civilian here trying to contact the tech team. Claims there's a structural risk with the B-1B in prep. The response came almost immediately. Copy post 3. Hold position. Captain Miller is on his way. Michael heard the radio reply and stepped back, respecting the painted security line on the pavement. 2 minutes later, firm footsteps echoed across the tarmac. Captain Blake Miller appeared, sunglasses hanging from the collar of his uniform, wearing the expression of someone who had already run out of patience before even hearing what was going on. "What's the situation here?" One of the airmen responded quickly. "This man says there's a fault on the B-1B, sir. He claims it's a structural issue and asked to speak with the tech crew." Miller turned to Michael, scanning him from head to toe. "Name?" "Michael Reed." "And you are?" "Retired chief mechanic. I spent over 40 years building and maintaining aircraft, including B-1Bs. I know that wing like the back of my hand, and the left actuator is stuck. The wing is slightly retracted. If it takes off like that, it'll shake, it'll pull, and it might fail." Miller took a deep breath, crossed his arms, gave a slight smile, subtle but laced with condescension. "Mr. Reed, with all due respect, we have a full team of engineers. The aircraft has passed 3 rounds of digital inspection. All sensors are functioning. And as far as I know, you don't have authorization to be here." "That's true. But machines are built by humans, and humans make mistakes. And there's a mistake on that aircraft. Can you show me technical data, or are you going off just a visual observation?" "I did observe, yes, but here, I've documented everything. Look at this. If it takes off like that, it'll come back in an emergency. If it makes it back at all." Michael opened his notebook and showed his notes, hand-drawn technical sketches with detailed markings about the wing imbalance system. Miller didn't even glance at the pages. He just nodded slowly, the kind of nod that ends a conversation politely. "Mr. Reed, I understand your concern, but right now you're a civilian without credentials interfering in an ongoing operation. This area is restricted. I'm going to ask you to leave. Step back immediately." Michael lowered the notebook. His eyes drifted one last time to the B-1B. The technicians were already wrapping up the final checks. The aircraft was nearly ready to be moved onto the runway for takeoff. He didn't say another word, just turned around and walked away slowly, his footsteps dragging across the hot pavement. Behind him, Captain Miller returned to checking the aircraft's data on his tablet. Everything showed green. Inside the base's control tower, the countdown for the test takeoff ticked away. The B-1B rolled slowly to the starting line. The deep rumble of its engines filled the air like a distant thunder. Then the command came over the radio. "Clearance granted. Proceed." The B-1B accelerated. Its tires gripped the runway with precision. The steel body lifted at a sharp angle and rose into Oklahoma's clear sky. But Michael, now outside the fence leaning against the back of his old pickup, he already knew what was coming. Just minutes after takeoff, during the initial acceleration, still under 350 knots, the system triggered an alert, and the pilot aborted the climb. The master caution light lit up with the message "Wing Sweep Assign" on the cockpit panel. The automated system had detected an abnormal lateral deviation. The pilot, experienced and sharp, recognized the issue instantly: instability in the left wing. "Requesting immediate clearance to return. I've got a serious issue with the wing." In the control tower, the air traffic controller responded without hesitation. "Cleared. Immediate return to Corridor 5. Ground emergency teams are on standby." The base went on alert. Radars tracked the aircraft's controlled descent. The plane landed safely, but the pilot was visibly tense. Technicians rushed to the aircraft. Equipment was hooked up in a hurry. From the hangar, Miller watched it all unfold. After hours of detailed inspection, the technical report was clear. The fault was recorded as aerodynamic imbalance caused by partial seizure of the left wing's hydraulic actuator. The exact failure Michael had described, word for word. In his office, Miller was met by Colonel James Fox, who entered with a grim expression. "Captain, you tell me, why was that aircraft's wing misaligned? How did that go unnoticed?" We're still investigating, sir. It might have been a failure in the pre-flight inspection, but the sensors showed nothing out of spec. Fox remained standing, his hand resting on the back of the chair across from Miller. His look wasn't one of anger. It was disappointment. He turned away and walked over to the table, where the runway reports were laid out, and began flipping through the security team's handwritten notes. Who were the two responsible for perimeter access this morning? Miller frowned, caught off guard by the question. Senior Airman Lewis and Jordan, sir. Fox read one of the entries out loud, almost to himself. Elderly man attempted to alert technical team about possible structural fault in B-1B, was escorted off base as per protocol. Name provided, Michael Reed. He lifted his eyes slowly. Now he was the one asking the question. You heard that name this morning and still sent him away? I'm sorry, sir. I didn't recognize the name. He said he had experience, but our team is qualified, and he didn't have clearance. Captain Miller, let me tell you something. That man you didn't recognize was the backbone of our support squadron. He was known for his surgical precision and unmatched technical knowledge. A highly respected instructor and an expert on the very aircraft that failed today. Miller's eyes dropped to the floor. Bring that man back, Captain. Miller stood still for a second, as if the words were still sinking in. Then he turned sharply and rushed out to correct his mistake. Minutes later, already outside the hangar, he climbed alone into a military jeep and headed toward the outskirts of the base. On the passenger seat, the incident report remained open. Michael Reed's name underlined in red. The workshop was just a few miles from the east fence where the town gave way to open fields. It was a low building, the lights inside already off when Miller arrived. Michael's pickup truck was parked beside it. Miller stepped out of the Jeep slowly, tucked his shirt into his pants, and walked toward the entrance. Michael was sitting outside, on a wooden bench, wiping his hands with a cloth. He was just about to close up for the day when he noticed the man in uniform approaching. He looked up. Miller stopped a few feet away. The same man who, hours earlier, had dismissed him without a second thought, now looked different, less certain, more human. Mr. Reed. Michael said nothing. He simply flipped the cloth in his hands and folded it neatly. You were right. The actuator locked up. The plane had to come back. If the pilot hadn't been experienced and acted fast, something worse could have happened. I didn't listen to you, and I'm sorry for that. Now the colonel wants you back on base. We need your help to go over the entire system before the next test. Michael went inside, grabbed the old notebook from the workbench, and locked up the shop. Let's go. He climbed into the Jeep without another word. On the way back to base, Miller drove in silence. Only the sound of the road beneath them, and the quiet sense that this time things were being done the right way. By the time they reached the main gate of the base, night had already fallen. The hangar lights lit up the tarmac, and the B-1B sat still, like a sleeping giant waiting for repair. No one announced their arrival. Michael simply stepped out of the Jeep, walked alongside Miller, and entered Hangar 19 as if coming home after a long time away. The two airmen who had turned him away earlier, along with engineers and technicians, stepped aside in silence. Only their eyes spoke, eyes that now understood, far too late, who this man truly was. The left wing was still suspended, its compartment partially open. Michael approached slowly and examined the exact spot where the malfunction had begun. He ran his fingers gently across the structure, as if sensing something invisible. For the next several hours, Michael led the repair process with precision, while everyone else watched his every move. First, he asked for the wing rigging pins to be inserted into the wing tracks to lock the sweep mechanism. No one releases an actuator with a free wing. Then he knelt beneath the articulating arm and, by touch, felt resistance in the hydraulic rail. He removed the lower panel cover using a torque wrench and, with a small inspection mirror, confirmed the partial actuator lock, caused by fluid contamination and a jammed servo valve. He ordered a circuit bleed through the maintenance drain, connected the external hydraulic test pump unit, HTPU, and replaced the servo valve with a backup unit from the base inventory. He pressurized the system, and cycled the wing 3 times, using temperature variations, closely monitoring the portable display to ensure equal pressure on both sides. When the pins were removed and the wing completed the final cycle with perfect alignment, he closed the panel, wiped the grease from his hands, and gave a small nod. The aircraft was ready. From the upper walkway inside the hangar, Colonel Fox had been watching the entire operation. He came down, walked up to Michael, and extended his hand. "Mr. Reed, on behalf of this base, thank you. We couldn't have done it this fast without you. You reminded us that the experience of people like you isn't just valuable. It's essential to doing better work." The next morning, the sky was clear and wide open, the sun slowly rising behind the hangars. The base's main runway had been prepared. After completing a functional check flight, the Rockwell B-1 Lancer now awaited clearance for takeoff. Michael stood a bit farther back, just outside the control tower. He watched in silence as the engines roared to life, and the aircraft began to move, then lift off and soar into the sky, vanishing into the horizon. He remained there for a few more seconds, motionless, looking up, knowing that through his life, he had shown one simple truth. Our years lived aren't the end of the road. They're the runway we take off from. If you enjoyed this story, click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next.